Well, you mentioned earlier it's been tough to communicate or get the message out in terms of the recommendations that PEF and other state unions and other unions in general are making. You have that opportunity now, in addition to the temporary workforce, which should be more than re-examined. What else have you been pushing that maybe you're frustrated with that the message is not getting out?
Well, one of the things we were pushing was the use of overtime. Overtime is your salary plus another 50%. And the state has routinely just used excessive amounts whether it was needed or not. And we kept saying, try to rein in some of that, and you could save a few $100 million in the process. So the state actually said they were going to give it a try. Just a couple of weeks ago, I'm smiling because it was DOT that said they were going to try this, and because the governor put a moratorium on overtime. Said unless it's an emergency, stop the overtime. So he was listening to us. So there's a project going on being run by Department of Transportation in Albany. It's Route 87 at exit 6, which is only a few blocks from my office actually. They're redoing the exit ramps and everything to relieve congestion, and it's a pretty good project. And they got federal money to help do that.
Stimulus money.
Stimulus money. But even though they have, local crews, not state employees, just regular construction people doing the work, you have to have a couple of state engineers inspecting and supervising while the work is getting done. But these guys, of course, work 5 days a week, and normally on the weekends they work overtime. They were told, no, you go home, we can't have you work overtime. But we're going to have this other company come in, and they're going to do the supervision on the weekend.
So that work is going on without state supervision?
Well, the state has delegated it to this other supervising company, so to speak. And we looked at the numbers, and it looks like it's for that particular weekend work, it's costing 7 times the price.
7 times?
Because we're cutting overtime, but we're not saving any money. And that's always been the problem. Whenever the state has gone through a period where they say we're going to have to lay off state workers because we can't afford this high payroll anymore. Typically, in the few years that they've done that in the past, they've let go a few thousand state workers. The agency said, well, we need to get this work done. So they'd contract out the work, so we'd have fewer employees but higher costs.
That makes no sense at all.
It makes none at all.
You've had the opportunity, you've sat at the table with the governor. How frustrating is it to continue to try to come back again and again and again and then get beaten up by the governor at the same time?
It gets very frustrating when you don't know what's going to happen from day to day, when you're not sure what's even going to be said from day to day. There have been a lot of statements made about our union and other unions and the contracts that we have by either the governor or people that work for the governor, or sometimes just in the press, that is very hurtful. One comment was that we're not really state workers, the leaders of these unions. And of course we are. I'm a 25-year state employee. Don't say I'm not a state worker. Another was that we don't care if people get laid off because laid off people don't vote in union elections anyway. That was crazy. Our arguments that, consultants cost more and the governor says they don't, in the face of 2 state comptrollers, one Republican, one Democrat, both saying that contracting out costs more and the state should start cutting it back. Carl McCall said it when he was comptroller, and the comptroller before him said it. And in fact, DOT went so far as not believing either comptroller, so they spent taxpayer money to commission a study on whether or not consulting actually cost more or not. And then they refused to release the study, and we had to get it through a Freedom of Information Act request. And the reason they didn't want to release it was because the study they commissioned said the same thing, that consulting costs more money than is necessary.
Why do you think then public employees right now have that bullseye not only painted on their back, but their chests, their sides, their forehead? Why are you such a target?
In the state, I think it's frustration on the part of the governor's office that the legislature is not going along with his ideas. And we have the feeling that if the governor can't convince the legislature to do what he wants, he's going to threaten us so that we then go to the legislature and tell them to work faster and fix this so that we don't get hurt anymore. And so in a sense, we're being enlisted to help the governor motivate the legislature. If you look at someone in a comparable salary, if you look at an accountant who works for the state versus an outside accountant, if you look for a doctor who works for the state versus an outside doctor.
Give us a couple of examples.
We generally make, according to U.S. statistics, about 18% less. If you're a government employee in a highly educated position of responsibility, you tend to make about 18% less if you work for the government than if you work for some private organization. So if you're working for a private law firm, obviously you're going to make more than if you're working for the state as an attorney. If you're a psychologist in a private practice or working for a fancy hospital, you're going to make a lot more than if you're working at West Seneca Developmental Center. You know, and that's the way it is for all these professions. Even our nurses, we have thousands of nurses that work in state hospitals, correctional facilities, mental health facilities, SUNY hospitals. They make thousands of dollars less than nurses who work in other hospitals, just because those other locations, they make a profit. And so part of that profit goes to their staff. When you're a public employee, you're not working for a profit-making firm. So there's no profit to share with you. So you're naturally going to make a little less.
Well, if you're making 18% less compared to working in the private sector, and then the governor comes along and says, you know what, I want you to take a day off, an unpaid day off, once a week for every month. Well, that's 20% of your salary flying out the door on top of that.
It is. And here's the rub, too, because we said we want everybody to be treated equally, because he keeps saying everybody should equally share the burden, make the sacrifice. Those kinds of words are being used in Albany. So we said, okay, so if you're going to reduce our pay through elimination of a raise or use of a furlough day or whatever the mechanism there is it just state employees that are going to have to make this sacrifice? Are other people going to make the sacrifice? All the contracts the state has with outside vendors, most of which have increases built in annually. So if a vendor is getting $1 million for the services it provides this year, next year it's going to be $1.1 million. The year after that it's $1.2 million. So we said, if you want to reduce our income, are you going to reduce their income? The state leases office space all over the state. Are you telling those landlords the raise that's built into the contract for next year you're not getting because we're not going to give our employees raises either? The answer is, well, we can't break those contracts. So how can they break our contract? It was the response. If you want the burden shared by everybody, then make it everybody. Don't just make it among the people you want. And in fact, if I could say one other thing, it wasn't even all the state employees that were going to be sacrificing this way. Only half of the workforce was going to have to suffer a furlough. Only a portion of our membership or any of the union's membership is being threatened with layoffs. So it's never everybody. It's just some people.
Well, wasn't it even at that point in time where the governor had called for the furloughs and he turned around and tried to get pay increases for his press staff?
Yes, he did. And I'm not saying that certain people don't need increases in pay because of whatever their jobs might entail, but the timing of that is just so bizarre. You can't say one day we have to cut people's pay and the next day, oh, but we're giving these people more money for whatever the reason is. Each one of our work sites, people come to us and say, here's how money's being wasted. You'll have two prisons across the street from each other. One will have some piece of heavy equipment to do some work in the yard. And instead of borrowing it, you find out the prison across the street buys the same piece of equipment. It's this kind of stuff that we're trying to tell the governor and the legislature, if you just take a close look at your expenses, spend what you need to spend, and the rest of it you just don't spend, put it away for a rainy day or just cut it all together, you'll save what you need to save. But don't come to your workforce and say, we can't afford to give you what's in your contract and waste this money in these other places. One of them has to give, so it's your contract that's going to have to give because it's too hard to figure out how to stop all this other waste that's going on.